Well, good evening to one and all. Thank you again for tuning in to this live ACDP broadcast, where the ACDP interrogates matters that are taking place currently on the political spectrum, as well as things that are happening on the ground here in South Africa. But at the same time, looking at what are the ACDP's policies and what is the ACDP's view with regards to what is current. And so tonight, we do not have a president with us. So I want to apologize for him not being here tonight, but next week, we will definitely have the president back with us again. So he's asked for me to tender his apologies for tonight. So you've got the co-pilot steering the ship, but I'm also not alone tonight. I have one of our colleagues from Parliament who will be joining us shortly, the Honorable Steve Swart. And so just want to say to you, thank you. Thank you for your commitment, and thank you for signing in, and thank you for your faithfulness in logging in on a weekly basis. It shows your commitment to the ACDP, your commitment to godly biblical governance, and your commitment to the cause of a righteous government in South Africa. And so on behalf of our president, on behalf of the NEC team, the ACDP NEC, and the leadership of the ACDP, we just want to say good evening, welcome, and thank you again for joining in tonight. So we're gonna go through just some of the greetings that some of you may have put forward, and normally we have a few that come through, individuals who kind of greet us, and so we have Tabang Moshidi. Tabang, councillor from Tshwane, good afternoon, my president and deputy president. Thank you for your leadership. God bless you. Blessings, Tabang. Liberty, joy unspeakable and full of glory. All right, good evening, Liberty Sneeden from Pinetown, KwaZulu-Natal. Good evening, Liberty. And we have Bishop Eric Mangele, our PL from KZN. Good evening, President, Deputy President, Woman of Destiny President, and all members of the ACDP. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, amen. Blessings, Bishop, and Nora Mali. Nora says, good evening, leadership. Good evening, leadership and ACDP family. Good evening, Nora. And then we have Matabo Sukati. Good evening, President DP and family. We are marching on. Indeed, we continue marching. Christopher Kamfer. Good evening, DP and ACDP family. Good evening, Christopher. And then Amukele Maluleke. Good evening, Honorable Deputy Sir and ACDP family. Looking forward to yet another informative session tonight. Likewise, Tlotliso Mputi. Greetings, honorable leaders. Greetings, Tlotliso. And Vision Mudau. Good evening, Mr. Deputy from Musina, Limpopo. Good evening, Vision. And then we have our DSG, Norman Fana Mkonza. Shalom, shalom. The Honorable President in absentia, the Honorable DP, and the lovely ACDP family. Marianne Lotta. Good evening, Deputy and the ACDP family. It's cold and wet, but our hearts are warm. Indeed, indeed. Well, thank you for those greetings. And I came into a baptism of real water, cold and wet and windy here in the Western Cape. And so what a welcome I got when I landed yesterday. Both myself and the president landed almost simultaneously. And I think you've been watching the news, quite a stormy session that the Western Cape has been having over the last few days. So thank you again for those greetings. We're going to begin our broadcast tonight. And as I said, I have with me one of our colleagues and one of the longest serving members, certainly on the Justice Portfolio Committee here at Parliament, the Honorable Steve Swart. And he and I are going to be moving ahead tonight as we look at the aspects of the cabinet and the selection of cabinet and the role of cabinet and our chairs and the election of chairs tonight. The Honorable Steve will be taking us through that, the chairs of the different committees. And then we're going to be speaking to him also about a speech that he gave in Parliament today, his first speech in this 7th Parliament on the position of former Chief Justice, former Justice Hlophe, Judge Hlophe, who would be sitting on one of the members on the JSC. And so the Honorable Steve will be speaking to us through that. Steve, welcome. And maybe you just like to greet the members and share a few words before I maybe just speak about our topic for tonight.
Yes, thank you, DP, and good evening to you. Good evening to our president in absentia and to all the members, the NEC members, all the members, all the ACDP family. It's a great honor to be on the show tonight, and it's a great honor to represent you in Parliament. We as the ACDP have hit the ground running, and I really look forward to sharing with you tonight. And it's wonderful to be on the show with our Deputy President, Honorable Wayne Thring.
All right. Well, thank you, Honorable Steve Swart. We have currently, there's in the news, obviously, a lot of speaking, a lot of talk around the GNU, but in particular, the formation of cabinet. And sometimes we take it for granted that we who have been in the system for a while know what cabinet actually does, what is the function of cabinet, the role of cabinet, what are the duties and so on of cabinet, and how important is cabinet to our South African citizens in terms of their day-to-day life and the impact that cabinet decisions have on them. So there's a lot in there, and I've asked quite a few things. So maybe you'd like to just unpack that for us and for our viewers.
Yes, indeed. The starting point is our constitution, and our constitution separates government into 3 legs, which, as we know, is the judiciary, the courts, the judges, Parliament, and the executive. Now, as we know, we've had the elections, and then once the members of Parliament were sworn in, we had the election of the president, who's the head of the executive, the election of the speaker and deputy speaker, who head up the Parliament. And once the president was elected, he then elected and negotiated with members of the Government of National Unity for setting up his cabinet. Now, the cabinet ministers fall under the president, and it is set out in Chapter 5 of the Constitution, which is a starting point, which sets out all the powers and functions of the president as the executive. But I want to focus, as the DP has asked, on the executive authority, which is Section 85. Now, the president exercises his executive authority, so he runs he's in charge of the executive, which is all your state departments. what does it do? Section 85 implements national legislation, which we as Parliament pass, develops national policy, coordinates the functions of all state departments and administrations. That is very key. He prepares and initiates legislation that comes, so legislation comes from cabinet ministers who decide on policy. So the new administration, the 7th administration, will now decide on policy, and they will then initiate legislation that will then come to Parliament, and they will perform any other executive function. So Parliament plays a very important role in that regard. But as we now know, there's a very large cabinet has been appointed, 32 cabinet ministers, 43 deputies, with all the parties of the Government of National Unity. And so DP, those cabinet ministers then will account to Parliament, and we're in that process. And what is very interesting to see how in the new administration, a number of the previous portfolios have been split up. Now, for example, what was previously minerals and energy under the then Minister Gwed Muntashe has now been split, and you've got a separate ministry under electricity, and that we will now also be participating. Our DP will be serving on that portfolio committee, given the importance of Eskom. And so we've taken, as the ACDP, we've taken all these different departments which fall under different ministries and looked at it in great detail to see how these cabinet ministers will account to Parliament. Now, just to make it very practical, today, the Justice Portfolio Committee, and I'll touch on the issue of committees later, but the Minister of Justice, the newly appointed Minister of Justice, together with their Deputy Minister, together with the Department of Justice, came to our newly elected Justice Portfolio Committee today and started to account and exercise oversight. So, DP, that's a very brief oversight. I'll go into a lot more detail as we go along. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you, Steve, Honourable Swartz. I think if we look at just the number of or committees that have been established as a result also of the new ministers, what kind of pressure does it would you say that it places on those political parties like ourselves, where we have to kind of cover, try to cover so many different portfolios, and what would you say to the viewers in terms of the need to actually grow the ACDP in terms of that particular challenge that is being faced?
Whilst we're very appreciative of the fact that we've got 3 members of Parliament, it's a massive loss to have lost Honourable Mari Sukkers, and I just again want to commend the incredible work that she did due to our reduction in votes, and many political parties lost votes as well and lost a large number of seats. If you take the majority party, previous majority party, ANC, lost 72 seats. Can you believe it? So to have 3 seats, you've got to cover a large number, and there are, at the last count, there are 30 portfolio committees. And so what I've been doing in the last week, I'm also the whip. So we've got our president, our deputy president, and whip at Parliament. I've been negotiating with other political parties as to which portfolio committees we will serve on. And it's not a given that you get the one that you have requested. So there's been a lot of negotiating with political parties right from the IFP down as to which portfolio committees we will serve on. And obviously, we've been prioritizing what we believe is very important. But DP, the point is so important that you made. We've got to grow our numbers so that we can have increased representation in Parliament. Your larger parties have 1 or even 2 members from that political party per portfolio committee, whilst we are very stretched to try to cover the bases of all of 30 political portfolio committees. It's almost impossible. We speak as much as we can on the issues, but you cannot attend properly, and you only basically allowed the membership 2 full memberships, and even that in itself is a huge amount of work because those portfolio committees sit full time. The Justice Portfolio Committee is one of the hardest working. It can sit up to 3 to 4 days a week, and you then cannot attend to other portfolio committees. So I think that is the key role, that we've got to increase our numbers. But we are there to work very hard. Thankfully, The three of us, our president, our deputy president, and myself, are very experienced. And you choose your battles, you choose when to attend. And just to give you a quick example, in today's portfolio committee, which was the first meeting of the new Justice Portfolio Committee in the new administration, once we'd elected the portfolio chairperson, the department then started its presentation, as did the Office of the Chief Justice. And we only had literally from 1 o'clock to 2:30, that's an hour and a half, to go through an extensive presentation. And you can imagine what the Justice Department covers. It covers the operation of courts. It covers maintenance. It covers so many issues, the finances of running it, dilapidated courts, maintenance, you can name. And once they had made their presentation, we were given hardly any time to engage and ask questions, to exercise oversight over the presentations and over the department. And that is where I, as an experienced member of parliament, I asked to the chairperson that the meeting should be postponed to a later date so that we can engage in depth. It doesn't help just to accept the presentations. You have to engage in depth. You've got to be prepared. We were prepared, but there wasn't enough time. And thankfully, because of our standing, our gravitas as the ACDP, the newly elected chairperson says he agrees with the ACDP, and I was supported by other members from other political parties to say we will postpone the meeting today to a later date so that we can continue our engagement. And that is so key. So you have, in a portfolio committee, whilst we are 3 out of 400 MPs, in a portfolio committee, you can have a lot more sway. And I just want to honor our president and our DP, who are known. Our president will be the longest serving member on the police portfolio committee. And our DP, you've done remarkable work on DTI and others. And we've got a lot of gravitas. And I thank the Lord for that, because we've got the favor of God, and we operate, and we don't take that lightly, like a Daniel, where we come and we attempt with an excellent spirit. And then you have the ears of the other parties there, because you bring good solutions. Everyone agreed. There wasn't enough time. I wasn't playing politics today. I said, we don't have enough time. I suggest we postpone this meeting to a short time within the next week, when we will be able to deeply engage on these issues. But just to emphasize again, we need more members of parliament.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely, Steve. And I couldn't emphasize that more. And I think you've done it so well and eloquently as well. But maybe now coming to, just before I come to the next question, we had a similar situation because we've got the two committees now, mineral resources and then electricity and energy kind of coming together. And our committee meeting ended up an hour being extended. It was supposed to have concluded at about 2:30, and we concluded at like 3:30. So these are some of the challenges that we sometimes face when we are in our committee meetings. But coming now to committee meetings, there's obviously the selection also of committee chairs, and you've been involved in that particular process of looking at the committees. Currently, there's all of your portfolio committees are looking at sitting and electing their committee chairs. So as we discuss the function of the cabinet, perhaps if you could take us through the function and the importance of the committees as the chairs and the committees are being put together, with yourself doing an inordinate amount of work as our whip, sitting on the programming committee and the whips committee and so on, and in trying to make sure that Parliament actually works efficiently. So if you could just take us through the function of the portfolio committees.
So again, to take a step back and to look at what the Constitution says about the role of Parliament, and that is in Chapter 4 of our Constitution, and in Section 55, it sets out the powers of the National Assembly, and it says, and that the committees form part of the National Assembly. So in exercising its legislative powers, the National Assembly passes, considers, or amends any legislation. So a committee will consider legislation and initiate or prepare. So a committee itself could even bring legislation. We've done that in the past, where a committee itself initiates legislation. So it's the one side of the committees is the lawmaking part, which is crucial. As I indicated earlier, the minister, as the executive, will initiate policy and bring a bill, a draft bill, to Parliament, and then it is referred to a portfolio committee, and we will then consider it. But at the same time, as I said, the committee itself, we as Parliament can also initiate legislation. Now, it also says that the second very important part of the committees is the oversight mechanism. And there it says under 55.2, the National Assembly must provide for mechanisms to ensure that all executive organs of state in the national sphere of government are accountable to it and to maintain oversight over the exercise of national executive authority, including the implementation of legislation over any organ of state. So it's to hold government accountable through the exercise of oversight. Now, to bring that practically, that is what we were trying to do today. You had the Department of Justice reporting to the Justice Portfolio Committee, and making a presentation on what they've been doing, how they're spending their money, and then we engage, excuse me, with them, and we exercise oversight. That is a very important function, and that's why we don't take it lightly, and that's why I objected to the limited time we had available today. And I said, we cannot do our job properly, and that's all their members of Parliament agreed. So that is the key part of our committees. What we had, because it's a new administration, there's been a lot of negotiating for the chairpersons of portfolio committees. So you had various parties that were part of the Government of National Unity have now got chairpersons of portfolio committees, various portfolio committees. In my case, it was an ANC portfolio committee chairperson who I know very well. I've got a very good relationship with him. And so that is the key role of committees, exercising oversight. And again, it's a lot of hard work. You've got to do a lot of reading. Thankfully, we've got excellent researchers, I'm sure DP on your committee as well, that prepare documents, they prepare your research documents for you, but you also do your reading. You watch the media, you watch what's happening in the media. If, for example, in the last Parliament, it was the Thabo Bester escape. That was a massive issue, and we had an inquiry from the then Portfolio Committee of Justice and Correctional Services into that, and we conducted that inquiry. So you have an inquiry as well. So again, at the moment, the function that we are performing is oversight of the budget vote. Now, it's interesting, the budget was announced in February under the previous administration, but because we've had elections, there's a transitional step now, and we're dealing with the same budget, which must be passed by the end of this month. So there's massive pressure on all of us to finalize the budget by the end of this month. Otherwise, government will not be able to spend a cent if that appropriation bill is not finalized at the end of this month.
Well, I think that's obviously going to be perhaps some questions and some elaboration on on the budget and what that actually means, perhaps at another time. Just looking at some of the challenges that we are facing, with budget deficit, deficit on our on the national budget, deficit on the current account. Importing, we import more than we export, huge unemployment. Our industries are essentially in decline. We've had limited growth, GDP growth. And so I think it's going to be very good for us to perhaps at some stage interrogate the budget and look at some of the ACDP policies that we have. And I believe that we've got some excellent financial economic policies to help grow the country if the ACDP were to be the government of the day. Like one of the independent economists indicated, that the ACDP has some of the best financial economic policies that he's seen. But that would be a discussion, I think, for another opportune moment. But before we let you go, Honorable Swart, today you raised the ACDP objection to Judge Hlophe sitting as a member from Parliament on the JSE representing Parliament, or representing his his political party, the MKP. Now, what were the reasons for the ACDP's objection as you presented it in Parliament today?
No, well, thank you very much. And again, when one adopts a position, we have a caucus at Parliament. We discuss it amongst the President, the DP, and myself to reach the position. So I consulted our leadership at Parliament before we took the decision. So let's just take a step back. Earlier this year, Parliament impeached Judge President Hlophe following the findings of gross misconduct by the Judicial Services Commission. That was a finding that was brought by the Judicial Services Commission that appoints, fires judges, and deals with judges. Now, that impeachment resulted in Judge President Hlophe no longer being a judge. However, he was elected to be the top of the list of the MK party. So he became a member of Parliament. There's nothing in the qualification grounds, which is section 47, which would disqualify a person from being a member of Parliament where they had been impeached. And this, to me, is a lacuna. It's a gap in the law, because we had the same situation with the former public protector, Advocate Nkwebane, who was impeached by Parliament when she was the former public protector, and then she took up a seat in Parliament. Now, it's unbelievable. So we impeached the judge president. He then became a member of Parliament, and then his political party designated him as one of the members that represents Parliament on the Judicial Services Commission to appoint and fire judges, the very body that fired him. Legally, there's nothing to disqualify him, but ethically, and that was the ethical position that we took today. I said, and of course one has to bear in mind that the Judicial Service Commission plays a key role in appointing judges for our courts and constitutional courts. And there are a number of very important appointments that they need to make this session. And that is the new Supreme Court of Appeal judge and, of course, the new Chief Justice. Hugely important appointments. And remember that in South Africa, you do not elect judges like in other countries. So the only body which has a say is the Judicial Service Commission, which has representatives from Parliament. There are 6 designated members from the National Assembly and certain number from the other, from the National Council of Provinces. I just want to check, it's section 178, which sets out, and 4 permanent members from the National Council of Provinces. So 10 politicians are sitting on this board, on the Judicial Service Commission. Now, I said today, whilst Dr. Hlophe is highly qualified, and I know him personally, I said, and whilst there's no legal impediment to him serving on the Judicial Service Commission, I said the prospect of a nominee who was removed from judicial office for gross misconduct, sitting on the very body that made that finding, is, in the view of the ACDP, plainly wrong. It's ethically wrong. And I said those that are appointed to the Judicial Service Commission to appoint and discipline judges must themselves be above reproach to ensure the legitimacy of the judiciary, given the fact that they are not elected. And I said the ACDP cannot, in good conscience, support today's nominations, as those that are nominated include the Dr. Hlophe, who will represent us as the ACDP and speak on our behalf as representatives of the National Assembly in the Judicial Service Commission. And I said, we cannot, with that background, accept that. And then I concluded by saying clearly there is a gap in the law that needs to be addressed either by a constitutional or other legislative amendment to address this issue, which in our view is obvious. It is legal ethics 101, very basic. And that is the reason why we formally objected to the nomination of the Honorable Hlophe to sit on the very body that fired him. Now, one can imagine when there are interviews being conducted by aspirant judges to higher courts, and they say, but how can we be interviewed by a person that was found to be guilty of gross misconduct? And I think there are going to be serious challenges to that. And I'm actually surprised that that nomination came through. But it is almost like a pointing in the eyes of Parliament to say we will present whoever we want, no matter the outcome. And there's no ways that we as the ACDP we're going to accept that. Thank you, DP.
Well, perhaps this is an opportunity for yourself to look at putting forward a private members bill to cover that particular lacuna or legal gap that exists, where there's no legal impediment which would prevent former Justice Hlophe from being a representative on the JSE. And if a private members bill were to come from yourself representing the ACDP and pass, one can obviously see the while there's no, as you said, no impediment legally, but I think morally, ethically, and just common sense would say that there is going to be a challenge and a conflict of interest with Judge Hlophe sitting and representing us on the JSE. So, but thank you, Steve. Comments on that? Maybe your final comment on a private members bill.
So my understanding is that there is one already being prepared, and so I will definitely fall behind that as well. There is one already in the last administration. We were looking already at that from a grouping of political parties because of the issue with the former public protector, Mkhwebane, which was a similar, and it would amend the disqualifications in terms of Section 47 to say if you've been impeached, then surely you should not be able to stand as a member of Parliament. And I think that tightening up, I would have loved to have drafted that myself, but it seems that horse is already bolted. But I will definitely be looking into this. If it's not brought very quickly, we will definitely take that up as well. So thank you, DP. Right. Thank you to everyone again. Right. It's a great honor to be part of this. And I really appreciate your prayers as we stand for justice and righteousness in our nation.
Well, thank you, Honorable Swart. We appreciate you, and thank you also for the hard work and the work that you're doing within particularly the Justice Portfolio Committee, the work that you're also doing for the AC, one of our longest standing members of Parliament after the President. And so we certainly appreciate the work that you do and how you valiantly represent the ACDP, the biblical values that the ACDP stands for across all of the different committees that you would sit on, whether it's the Finance, the Justice Portfolio Committee, other committees that you sit on, representing the ACDP as the ACDP Whip in the Whips Committee, and the programming committees, and so on at Parliament. We just want to appreciate you and thank you for the work that you're doing. We're going to quickly now, before we release you, we're going to look at whether there are any questions or comments. And if there's a question, then we would be able to, Steve, just maybe feel that to you. All right, let's see. We have Viren Chetty, Pastor Viren, who says, for expediency and not having to defer matters, should the presentations not be handed out in advance so that members can prepare in advance and so resources can be properly used? I think it's a fair... I think that where we have some presentations, it may be good, but some of it is also just an interview. It's an interview between myself and somebody else, or the president and somebody else. In this case, myself and Honorable Swart. But I think perhaps in terms of the statement, Steve, that has gone out. Your statement, your speech.
Maybe Mr. Chetty can give us clarity, but I think what he's saying is presentations to members of Parliament. That's another thing as well, where I indicated that the presentations today were too late, and I think that is what he's referring to avoid because what happened today is we had the department and officials flying down at very short notice. And I just want to emphasize that it is a convention of Parliament that presentations must be given 7 days before the House, the committee is sitting. But because of the elections and because of the constitution of the committees and the negotiations, I had the greatest sympathy for the department. They were given notice yesterday to be in Parliament today. And that was totally unacceptable. And I will be raising that tomorrow in the Chief Whip's Forum, that we stick to our convention, that presentations by departments to portfolio committees must be submitted in time, 7 days beforehand, to enable us to fully prepare ourselves for exercising our oversight. So an excellent observation from Mr. Chetty. If he is referring to our presentations here, then one would also, but these are, as you indicated, mostly interviews.
I think you're correct. I think he was referring to the presentations where you indicated that, you kind of got them and didn't have an opportunity to peruse them and go through it efficiently and properly. So thank you for that observation also, Pastor Viren. Appreciate that comment. Do we have any other comments or questions before we release our Honorable Swart? ACDP Limpopo, appreciation to our honorable members of Parliament who participate in the committees with integrity and godly leadership and always stay relevant with clarity and godly wisdom. Thank you from the ACDP in Limpopo. Appreciate that. And Corinne de Klerk says yes to ethics. That's who the ACDP is and what we continue to strive to be, a party that upholds strong ethical principles. Jimmy Dobson says, we thank God that at last we can voice our disagreements with these ridiculous nominations and decisions that the ANC before would just run with and enforce on our beloved nation. Indeed, Jimmy, and thank you also for that. And yes, we do have within the ACDP our Honorable Swartz, the President, myself, who will continue to be that voice that will speak truth to power wherever and whenever it is needed. All right, I think that that seems to be the comments and the questions. The one question from Pastor Viren. So, Honorable Swartz, thank you so much again for your time. Appreciate it, and looking forward to engaging with you further, perhaps next on the national budget. But perhaps that's for another. But thank you so much, and bless you.
Thank you, DP. Thanks to the colleagues. I've got a 5:30 tomorrow morning radio interview, so I need to prepare for that as well. But thank you so much, and warm regards, and thank you so much for your prayers. Good night to all.
Bless you. Bless you. Thank you so much. All right. So thank you to those of you who responded to this first part of our live streaming. The next is to do with the biblical governance, and so we're going to look at the aspect of biblical governance, and I'm going to just touch on a few aspects. We do have a slide presentation that has been prepared. I'm not sure if it's there. We go. All right. So the slide presentation is up on the screen, and so you can follow me. I will try to be as concise and as quick as possible on this aspect of biblical governance. And I am unfortunately now there. Okay, there we go. So let's first look at what the dictionary definition of biblical governance is. Governance essentially is the action or manner of governing a state or an organization or a business or even a church or even a political party. So it's the action or the manner of governing a state. So governance is to do with function. And I think it's so important that we understand when we speak about biblical governance, when we speak about godly governance, it's important that we within the ACDP understand exactly what it is that we are speaking about. So governance is an action. It's an action or manner of how we govern. So we talk about biblical governance, and let's look at what the scripture says. What does the Bible say? And what is one of the key scriptures dealing with biblical governance? Exodus 18 from verses 21 to 23 says, moreover, you shall select men from all the people. And here are the men that needed to be selected. Able men, number one. Number two, such as fear God. Number three, men of truth. And then number four, hating covetousness. And then what is the purpose? What is the function of these? What are these men to do? And then you place such over them to be rulers. So here is the purpose for them to be what? To be rulers. Rulers of thousands and rulers of hundreds and rulers of 50s and rulers of 10s. And then what is the second purpose? And let them judge. So it's rule, judge, and let them judge the people at all times. And then it will be that every great matter that they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge. And so it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. For if you do this thing and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all those people will also go to their place in peace. And so governance essentially is reducing the burden. So governance is also it's about delegation and reducing the burden. And in this case, we understand when Jethro was speaking to Moses, it was looking at saying to Moses, this burden, Moses, that you are carrying in trying to judge the people and rule the people by yourself is not working. And so Moses' father-in-law Jethro comes and gives him this particular piece of advice in Exodus chapter 18, that Moses ought to choose men with a particular qualification. And then Deuteronomy 1:12 says, Moses again says, how can I alone bear your problems and your burdens and your complaints? And then in verse 13, the instruction, choose wise, understanding, and knowledgeable men from among your tribes, and I will make them heads over you. All right. So from these passages of scripture, and this is known also as the Jethro principle, which is a system of governance that Jethro had given to his son-in-law Moses. And we would do well taking heed of the fundamental principles or characteristics of biblical governance. What are these characteristics? What are these fundamental characteristics of biblical governance? Godly governance as Jethro gave to Moses. Number one, these have to be men and women of ability. It's got to be men and women who have a particular ability, a particular skill. It's not putting people into positions because they are your family, because they are your friends, because they are your comrades, because they're your cadres. You put them in those particular positions because of merit. They must have the ability to perform a function. Secondly, truthfulness. These men and women must be in governance, in positions of governance, in particular biblical governance. These men and women must love the truth. These are not men and women who are fibbers. These are not men and women who are economical with the truth, but these are men and women. Economical with the truth is another way of saying a person is lying. So these are not men and women who lie, but these are men and women who are truthful. And then thirdly, they hate covetousness. And what covetousness simply is, it's an insatiable desire for worldly gain. And so those that we place in positions of governance must not be those who have an insatiable desire for worldly gain, because then their focus is on self and what it is that they can gain for themselves, rather than having a disposition of servanthood and servant leadership. And then the fourth characteristic is fearing God. I always say, if leaders and individuals in governance sectors, those who are in positions of governance, are incapable and do not fear God, how then will they fear man? How then will they fear those that they are called to serve? And so these four biblical characteristics that Jethro gave to his son-in-law Moses, I think are key cardinal aspects of biblical governance. The instruction to Moses, as I said, also comes with the twofold purpose. The first purpose is to rule. And we must understand that this is our position. It is our position as children of God, as ambassadors of the King, to represent his kingdom here on earth, as Jesus taught us to pray, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And so if we are to be the ones who are representatives of the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven, then we are the ones that also ought to be legislating and ruling on behalf of our King. So the twofold purpose, the one is rulership and the second is judging. So here we see the rulership aspect, the legislative aspect that Steve spoke about, Honorable Steve Swart spoke about earlier on. The legislative aspect, which is what cabinet does, is the position that I believe that we as Christians are the ones that ought to be taking that particular role seriously and ought to be the ones legislating on behalf of our King. Secondly, judging. Right now we have those who have secular worldviews, judges that are secular, judges that are atheists, judges who do not know God. And these judges now judge on behalf of ourselves. They judge even matters pertaining to the church. But here we see that it is men who are truthful, men who have the ability, men and women truthful, have the ability, hating covetousness or dishonest gain, and who fear God. These are the men and women that should be the ones who are in positions, leadership positions, legislative positions, as well as representing us in the judiciary. So rulership, legislative function, and judging, the judicial function, which is our role within the church when we speak about biblical governance. Now, unless we have men and women who possess the characteristics outlined in the Jethro principle, which is referring to biblical governance, then my submission, if we do not have godly governance, biblical governance, and we do not employ or we do not put in place and continue to fight for biblical governance and godly governance in South Africa, then we invite immorality. Then we invite greed, arrogance, self-seeking, and corruption in government and other institutions across the board. And so one cannot overemphasize the importance of godly governance. All right, let's begin to just break this down a bit. So what do we mean by governance? All right, governance has been defined to refer to structures and processes that are designed to ensure accountability, transparency, responsiveness, the rule of law, stability, equity, and inclusiveness, empowerment, and broad-based participation. And so in development literature, all of these processes is what is defined as good governance. And so development literature uses the term good governance. Now that's quite packed, all right? When we look at what good governance actually is: accountability, transparency, responsiveness, responding to the needs of the people that you say you represent, the rule of law. And the law that applies to the ordinary Joe Soap on the ground is the rule of law that has to apply to the president, is the rule of law that has to apply to the judge. The law must be not just be seen to be equal, but the law must be applied equally when we speak about rule of law. And so good governance also speaks about the rule of law. Good governance brings stability. How do we create stability in terms of our policies? You know, if you have policy instability or political instability, creates challenges within the country. And then we talk about, equity and inclusiveness, that all are equal in terms of equity. All are equal before the law. And inclusiveness, all groups of whether it doesn't, irrespective of your religion, irrespective of your tongue, irrespective of your language, irrespective of the color of your skin, there ought to be inclusiveness when we speak about good governance. And so good governance is quite packaged. So when continuing to look at the aspect of governance, it ensures that everyone in an organization follows appropriate and transparent decision-making processes, and that the interest of all stakeholders, shareholders, managers, employees, suppliers, customers, citizens, are protected. When good governance, godly governance, is not initiated, then the reverse actually happens, and you don't have transparent decision-making processes. Then there's a cloak and dagger, and behind the scenes and behind closed doors decision-making processes that take place and begin to be implemented because there is no transparency. Good governance also helps to always act in the best interest of the country. More specifically, good governance improves performance of the different departments and helps government to become more stable, productive, and to unlock new opportunities. It also reduces risks and enables faster and safer growth. I mentioned that we want to, again, just look at unpacking the budget when we deal with the budget later on in the year, because very clearly the policies that we currently have is what is causing South Africa to stagnate. We have little to no growth. And so when we even do have GDP growth, and we see some 0.5% GDP growth, it's jobless growth. We're not seeing employment increasing with that minuscule GDP growth. But where there's good governance, it enables faster as well as safer growth. And good governance also means that processes and institutions produce results that meet the needs of society, making the best use of resources at their disposal. The concept of efficiency in the context of good governance also covers the sustainable use of natural resources and the protection of the environment. So let's just look at this. In our committee meeting on electricity and resources today, I spoke about the aspect of beneficiation. And beneficiation essentially is a policy that if we apply this particular policy of beneficiation and apply it properly and apply it and implement the policy of beneficiation, which is a policy of current government, if we implement that policy, we would begin to see a growth in our economy. We would begin to see unemployment reducing. So we have some of the world's the best resources, mineral resources. Some 70%, for example, of the world's platinum is found in South Africa. But because of poor governance, because of bad governance, we are not making good use of our natural resources. We are not beneficiating. So beneficiating simply means adding value to our natural or raw materials that we have. So instead, our gold, our platinum, our chrome, even our coal, we export our top quality coal. We have some the exports of coal that goes to Europe increased by some 500 to 700% in 2023. All right, so we've got this huge export of our top quality coal, and yet South Africa during that period was facing some of the most severe load shedding periods ever. And government actually closed down one of the best coal power stations, the Komatipoort power station. We shut down the best and the most efficient coal-fired power station in the country during a period of severe load shedding where businesses were struggling, businesses were shutting down because there was not sufficient energy to have those particular businesses going. So yes, good governance, efficiency in the context of good governance covers the sustainable use of natural resources. And the ACDP, again, has those particular policies. We don't just talk about good governance, we also speak about biblical or godly governance. So there are 9 major characteristics of good governance. The first of which is participation. And so one has to ask ourselves the question, when laws are being enacted, whether it's the Bella Bill, whether it's the hate crime speech bill, whether there are bills with regards to nuclear energy, and currently there's a new nuclear power station that is on the cards to be built. And so when you have this new legislation that gets tabled at Parliament, the Constitution demands a public participation process. And we have to, I think, as the public, we have to understand that when we are not consulted, then legislation cannot go ahead. And so the members of the public must take advantage of the public participation process, and come and speak to government, whether you support a particular legislation or whether you oppose it. And if there are sufficient voices that opposes a particular legislation, then government has to listen to those particular voices and stop the process of passing a particular legislation. If they do not, and they bypass the voices during the public participation process, it can be taken to court. So they run the risk of that legislation being taken to court if they bypass or overlook the participation process. The second is consensus oriented accountability. We spoke about not being something behind closed doors. Accountability, transparency. Are you accountable to your peers? Are you transparent in the way in which you do business? Are you responsive? Do you respond to the needs of the public? Or is there a telephone in the office that just rings because somebody is busy playing video games or busy on their cell phone? So good governance speaks about being responsive. It speaks about being effective and efficient, equitable and inclusive. And as I said earlier, it also follows the rule of law. All right. I think I'm about halfway through the presentation. So, and we may be just kind of running out of time. So I'm going to pause here, and when the president is back, and should he wish to have the second part of the program aired, then I will certainly look at speaking to the second part of what biblical governance is, and the aspect of good governance also in the process. So I trust that that this has been of some use to you, and understand that as the ACDP are not just the implementers of good governance, but the ACDP seeks to implement godly governance. All right. So if there are some comments, I see JJ. Thank you, JJ Scholes, who indicates our PL from Mpumalanga. Excellent information conveyed. Appreciate that, JJ. And Tlotliso Mputi indicates, if we do not get involved in lawmaking, the law in its current state teaches immorality. We need the ACDP in Parliament. Absolutely, Tlotliso. Thank you so much for that, for those inputs. All right, Norman Fana Mkonza, our DSG. This is great, DP. Thank you for empowering our members. Our absolute pleasure. All right. And I think that seems to be it with regards to the comments. Again, as we conclude, we just want to thank you. Thank you for taking time to join us this evening. Again, our apologies from our president, but I'm sure that he will be back with us next week, and you will again see his face and his comments. And so remember that South Africa needs the ACDP, and the ACDP needs you, as we all prepare now to work towards local government elections 2026. Thank you and God bless you.